Hi, and welcome to the FinTech Times Presents series of webinars. My name is Mark Walker, and the FinTech Times was established in 2016. It's a global multimedia news outlet centered around the world's first leading FinTech newspaper. We report on the latest and brightest ideas from the FinTech world. Firstly, I'd really like to invite our online audience. Thank you very much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Today, we're going to be continuing our discussion on Can FinTech Save the UK Economy, now part 3. It'd be really good if you can follow the conversation with the hashtag FinTechs Save UK, and obviously follow us at the FinTech Times. So we're going to be discussing this week's announcements. Is money actually moving to micro businesses and SMEs? A new week and a new acronym. BBLS, the Bounce Back Loan Scheme, has been introduced. And we're also going to be talking about, is this the right packages of support and what's the future going to be look like? And obviously we want to take as many as your conversations and your question points as possible. So please do use the Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen or the chat system to send us through some informations, and I will do my best to put them into the conversation and put them to our panelists. So we have a great group of people for today's discussion with a mix of experience, knowledge and opinions. So I'm going to invite them all to join me on screen. First, we have the regular webinar participants, John Davies and Simon Couton. We've got Max Firth representing Fund and Exchange. And we also have Alex Freen from Starling Bank, and hopefully soon to join Oliver Prill from Tride. So thank you very much, guys, for joining. I was just going to ask each of us to do a little brief introduction and overview of your role. Perhaps we start with Alex, if we could.
Hi, I'm Alex Freen. I'm Head of Corporate Affairs at Starling Bank. I look after our external communications, and that includes our public affairs, our PR, and a whole bunch of other things. I'm working closely with the team on our lending. Starling has got more than 1.3 million accounts and 140,000 SME customers. So we are right now looking to support them.
Wonderful, thanks very much. And Max, perhaps again, a short introduction.
Max Firth, I'm Managing Director at Funding Exchange. So we are working very, very hard at the moment, looking to try and get the right outcome both for businesses and for lenders. For businesses to make sure it's safe and quick for them to get what they need, and really for lenders to help them bridge their lack of digital capabilities, which obviously is not a problem for Starling as a new bank, but for some of the incumbents is a real issue.
Excellent. And Simon, short intro.
Hey Mark, thanks for inviting me back. So I'm Simon Curiton, I'm CEO of Funding Options, and we are Europe's leading marketplace for SME lending.
Last but not least, John, give us a quick overview.
Good morning, everybody. So John Davis, I normally sit here as Chair of the Association of Alternative Business Finance, which represents a large number of FinTech lenders, but also I'm the founder and chair of Just Capital PLC, which is an SME lender.
Hey, wonderful. So let's kick off with some information first of all. Obviously, as we know, the UK Finance have been publishing on a daily basis the applications and loan amounts that they've been lending to businesses. So just checking it up so I get it right in front of me. As of the 29th of April, there had been a 25,262 approved loans. Off the back of 52,807 completed applications, with a total lending of 4.1 billion, I think million. Max, can you give us some comments on that?
Yeah, it's the 4 billion. I mean, it's really accelerating. There's no doubt about it. However, if you just work out the maths on it, that means that the average loan size there is about 165k. That's a pretty punchy loan size for most SMEs. And what we see coming through the platform is that 90% of customers coming to us want under 100k, and actually a large chunk of those want under 50k. So there is a massive mismatch there between actually so far what CBILS is doing and what's being asked for in the market. Now, clearly, with CBILS, whatever we call the new one, that is supposed to in some way answer that. I think we've got concerns that a lot of the companies who might apply for that, we're really worried about that it might be just flattening the curve. It might be flattening the curve in terms of SME failure, and that it's just pushing off an evil day for a whole load of companies. And we think the real big risk coming up is at some point when things start to open up, companies are going to start having their costs massively increasing as they have to rehire staff, get buy stock and stuff, but the revenue just won't come back at the same speed. And so we think there's a huge risk opening up there as well.
Interesting, yeah. I'm just going to pause momentarily to give Oliver from Tide a quick chance to do his quick introduction. We just asked momentarily for some very quick introductions of who you are and your role, sort of thing, and then we'll get back onto the conversation and hopefully you can jump in with that afterwards.
Right, so first of all, apologies. I had problems with Zoom, which actually is bizarre because we've been intensive users, I think, all of Zoom in the last 3 to 6 weeks. So apologies for that. By the way, it's probably, for those, just a joke aside to start off with, apparently there are 2 Zooms on the stock market, right? And if you had invested in the wrong Zoom, you would have actually made 1,000% return. But anyway, so apologies for that. It's for those that know me also, it's not my style to turn up late, so deeply embarrassed. But nevertheless, thank you very much for having me. So just very quickly, Oliver Prill, I'm the CEO of Tide. Tide is the UK's leading small business business banking challenger. We have about 150,000 members, 1 in 40 SMEs. And clearly the topic we're talking about is, because of that, extremely dearly to us. And very much look forward to a good discussion, Mark, with you and others on the panel.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Oliver. So just going back onto the conversation, I was going to ask Simon to sort of just chip in there. We're talking about the numbers of applications to the CBILS program, the number of successful applicants and the amount of money of 4 billion being run. Max gave a really interesting, insightful look into that, saying, no, this is perhaps, different to some of the figures that they're seeing from the smaller micro businesses, and also a small comment there on the sort of the new acronym that we've just all learnt this week, which is BBLS, which is about whether this is, at a different end of the curve. What's your take on it, Simon?
So I think if you listen to what Max said, clearly there has been an acceleration, which is obviously positive. But for us, when we're looking at this, there's clearly a huge segment of the market that just isn't being served appropriately right now. So if you look at the average loan size of, what was it, 160K, I think Max did a quick calculation. That's a big number. Within our organization, our average loan size is circa 50K. But then we do serve all of market, all products, etc., etc. So that might be a little bit higher than some of our peers. But it's great to see that the loan issuance is accelerating. But for us, the lack of progress, if you like, at the lower end of the market, so startups, micro businesses, that is where we are deeply concerned, and I'm sure the rest of the panel would be exactly the same. And we definitely welcome the announcement of the bounce back loans, or the bouncy loans, whatever you want to call them, for ease. So BBLs, 0 to 50K, I think you can borrow up to 20%, 25% of your turnover, but it's capped at 50K. So that's clearly engineered or designed, if you like, to serve micro businesses, or the smaller end of the SME scale. And that's fantastically positive. But for us, the proof will be in the pudding. So an announcement is one thing, and we all saw what happened when CBILS was announced. The intent is there, the pre-design is there, but the execution doesn't match either the intent or the design. Is this going to be the same thing with BBLs? We're very encouraged with the announcement, but we're also concerned about the execution. And if I can draw people's attention again to the perennial conversation of who is distributing these loans. So at the moment, the assumption is, because again, there's a lack of clarity even in the BBL announcement, the assumption is it will be the same lender panel as for CBILS. And actually, I read overnight that Oak North have already ruled themselves out, and another participant in CBILS have already ruled themselves out. So it's that distribution network of lenders where we have concern, and the likes of Just Cashflow, Tide, Starling, etc., etc. These players are far better placed to distribute BBLs. Starling is in the lucky position of being able to potentially do so. But what about the rest of the alternative finance lenders? And that's the biggest issue that we see in the market today.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm just going to move to Alex on that sort of thing. Obviously, you come from an interesting position, and the connection to perhaps a lot of these small businesses are between yourselves and obviously Tide, where you have a lot of access to these small businesses. What do you think is the sentiment in there? Is it a question of that they can't get their loans, or do you think it's more of a question of that they don't actually know what they can and can't do?
Well, I think I just want to say I think the government is to be credited with at least trying to do something. They took action very quickly, and as always, when you act really quickly, the schemes that they brought out are flawed. We're going to, our intention is to launch loans under both CBILS and the Bounce Back Loan Scheme. We got our CBILS accreditation on the 11th of April. We have not opened our applications yet because we're still working out the final processes with the British Business Bank, but we hope to get those up and running. I think one of the questions for me is the expectations around these loans amongst people who are applying for them with us. And that is that, the Chancellor did give the impression that there was free money. When he did his budget speech on the 11th of March, he said, any good business will have easy access to finance. And that wasn't true. It's just not true. I'm not having a go at him. It was just, we are now having to deal with those very raised expectations. And we're going to try and service the loans, but we're not going to give money unless we think that it is the company can afford to service their debt and that they will be viable in the longer term. So we are going to look at, that affordability question, because these are not grants that are given from our point of view, regardless of your ability to pay back. So we don't want to have a whole bunch of small businesses that are put in a situation where they suddenly found themselves faced with debts that they can't pay. That said, I've been speaking to a lot of business customers myself because my phone number's on the website. So a lot of them have just been calling me direct. And I've been having some really interesting conversations with them about what they want the money for, how much they want, how their businesses are doing. And they need cash flow. They need cash flow around 100,000, sometimes more, sometimes less. And if it's a barber shop or a cafe, they've got no revenue at all. A lot of other businesses do have revenue, and they want the loan because they think they might need it in future. They don't necessarily need it now. That it hasn't started to bite yet. So there's a variety there. But my concern is about managing expectations amongst our customers, because we don't want to disappoint people who are, a lot of them, very desperate.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing. And maybe if I bring over to Oliver into this as well, obviously with servicing your business customers as well, what's the sort of sentiment within your sort of customers? Is that a similar echo to what Alex is representing from Starling?
Yeah, I think, the customer base is very, very similar. And so the issues are very similar. Maybe a couple of perspectives from what we've learned. And Alex, bit like, what you said is we have a lot of interaction with we call them members directly, in addition to statistical insights. And I think it's very, very important. I think, Alex, you finished off with that, is, in part of it, this is a real, real tragedy. I mean, we hear all the things in the public health crisis about how people are suffering. I mean, there's a lot of suffering out there at the moment. I think it's probably hard to compare the two, but I think we all need to have at a level, empathy for the distress that a lot of small businesses are under at the moment. Coming to a more numeric thing, I would actually, add to what has been said before as follows. From our research, we know that only 1 in 5 SMEs, small businesses, will actually consider a loan. And I think this is a very, very important insight in the sense that, 4 out of 5 actually rule themselves out, because they themselves are uncertain about their future, right? And so they don't really want debt, in there. Their self-judgment is that. And so the very first insight is the other government programs need to operate. We know that the grants from the business rates only apply to very few. The only government aid that is actually reaching at any scale is the job retention program. So I think that's number one. Now, as far as the loans are concerned, completely echoing here, we did some research about the loan size, and clearly, unsurprisingly, the vast majority need loans significantly south of 25,000. As a matter of fact, more like 10 or so, 10,000. And this is, I think, an important one. And by the way, as Alex was saying, if you look at the type of what is a small business, that's probably the sort of size that makes sense. You then look at distribution, and you have to say that the government, however well-intentioned, one has to say, and I think the time has to come where all of us who are impressed, I'm impressed, and we've been very supportive of the government, all its intentions, where people need to start calling out that after, what is it now, 6-7 weeks, it is just not, the reach is not good enough. And we, by the way, as Tide, have always lobbied because we intermediate a lot. It doesn't necessarily matter whether Tide goes on or not. We just need more distribution on the network. Things need to change very, very radically. The high street banks don't have the reach. They don't want to issue loans of those sizes. And therefore, the reach needs to be addressed in one form or another, that these loans can actually be distributed en masse. Next to the reach, it's the operational challenges. So I think, as Alex was saying, we hear this from many places that are already accredited, in civils, the processes are very cumbersome. A lot of adherence to risk policies that were right prior to the crisis are being enforced by the British Business Bank. So a lot of these things, in my mind, need to be tackled. And the way we tackle things, and I'm sure anyone here that's sort of in, let's say in modern management practices, the way you tackle things is by setting OKRs, right? And one of my key questions always has been when I, speak to parliamentarians and here in government and so on is, what's actually your objective? What is success? How many loans are you trying to get out? Is it really, because if the objective has, is to only get out 20,000 loans, it looks good, right? In our view, the objective should be north of 1 million loans. And it should also not be volume, because let's say it's not good enough, right? If you give, a British Airways, a huge loan. I mean, this is really about the key metric here is number of loans, not volume. And in our sense, someone needs to set a target, right? Is it 1 million, or so? And then we need to do the same thing as for testing. Then, there should be very tight targeting and actions to hit that target. That's how, in modern management practice, how you achieve objectives. That's how you get to results. And so in our mind, these are the sorts of things. So to summarize, the loans will not solve everything. Many people will not take loans. And the second big thing is we need to have reach. And within the reach, number 3 is we need to have OKRs that will allow us to basically measure and are all on the same page. And as far as Tide is concerned, it really needs, we are there to step in. We are also very happy to intermediate. We are platforms, so we have no aspiration to necessarily do the lending ourselves, although we can do some of it through our subsidiary called Tide Capital. But for us, the most important thing that these things actually start reaching SMEs. And maybe as a final thing, as an insight, if you allow me, Mark, one of the things we actually been surprised in is how much cash inflow we're seeing in the accounts from owners themselves propping up the cash in their businesses. And so what the unsung heroes in this whole thing are really entrepreneurs who, because they want to support their businesses, are currently putting in private cash into their businesses to prop them up. And we know for that there are 2 things. One is they will only do that if they have the resources, and at some stage they will run out. So this cannot be relied on forever. Secondly, and most importantly, it also there has to be light at the end of the tunnel. And so some of our focus has been shifting towards saying the government needs to announce how it will get us out of the lockdown. And this is not so much about going out of the lockdown tomorrow, but it's about giving people hope and perspective of why they should continue to support, with their private cash, their businesses. They need a perspective of when light at the end of the tunnel comes. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an overview of how we look at it.
Thank you very much for that. I was going to come to John next. There's an interesting question that's been put to all panelists, which is specifically about the BBLS not addressing the issue of capital availability. I know, John, you've got some sort of thoughts on that, and you promised also that the gloves are off now compared to the previous webinars, that you're going to be a little bit more argumentative with the government. So I'm looking forward to that.
Very kind. Yeah. So time to get off the fence, as they say. So let's understand where we are at this moment in time. So CBILS was launched, and again, to a fanfare, we, the fintech sector, immediately started saying this isn't going to work. Look at the numbers, look at the process. This is not how you're going to get funds out. And as we are now, sort of 6-7 weeks later, 25,000 businesses out of some 400,000 initial inquiries is a huge gap. The challenge has always been is that around liquidity. So therefore, the fintech sector cannot participate because it has no access to funds. So Starling is a licensed deposit taker, therefore has funds it can lend because it is a bank. So the challenge we have now is that we've now announced the new scheme, the bounce back scheme. So exactly the same issues. So if there was 400,000 before and they couldn't cope, you're asking exactly the same people to do this all over again with this time maybe 700,000 of applications. Worse, it's a manual process. You've got to fill a form in. So therefore, you're thinking, how's that going to fit and work? Now, the challenge, the fintech sector is ideally placed to be able to distribute these funds to these smaller businesses. A, because we've got relationships with 1 in 3 of them. Taking Oliver's position, he's got 150,000 businesses on his books. However, he can't lend a single penny because he has no access to capital to do so. Now, if the scheme is as it is 100% guaranteed by the government, which is flawed, however, that's what they've gone and announced. Therefore, there can be no risk to who distributes the funds on behalf of Treasury because it's 100% backed by Treasury. The challenge I'm seeing, and I'll say, is this is a charter for fraudsters. So far, they made the announcement on Monday. Today, they're still asking and talking to banks saying, oh, could we have your input on how this ought to be designed and put out? So therefore, they haven't even agreed yet how it's going to be put out. But last night, it came up the following headlines. It's going to be a 6-year loan, 100% guaranteed, up to 50 grand, which we all know, 25% of your turnover, no guarantee fees, with no credit checks, and light AML. Let me tell you who's going to be scrutinizing the rules more strongly than me right now, which is going to be all the fraudsters saying, great, how do we make a meal of this then? Because it's exactly what they're going to do. No credit checks, like AML, is a fraudster's charter. Now, on the upside, the right thing is those businesses that should receive the funding, absolutely, this is great. But back to Alex's point as well, we are a responsible lender. As a responsible lender, complying with the Lending Standards Board's rules around that, absolutely, we always look at serviceability, affordability, and making sure the borrower understands that what they're entering into. Here, we're actually inviting people to take on debt, yet we're not actually advising or saying, guys, actually, you shouldn't be doing this because you can't actually afford this. So also, if I was being less than above board, what I would also do as a small business is say, wow, 50,000 pounds, no PGs, nothing to pay. Happy days. I'll tell you what, I'll take 50 grand, thank you, from that bank. I'll probably take from that bank over there as well because nobody's checking. So therefore, I'm going to do that. And what I'll do is I'll actually pay off all of my debt that I've actually have gone on PG or might be personally liable for in any which way, pay it all off. If I'm a small business, so I'm a limited company, XYZ Limited trading as Bodgett and Scarpa as a MOT business. Nobody cares what's above the door. I'll wait 6 months. I'll change the limited company, drop all of the unsecured debt, and start all over again. Happy days. That is just, again, like I said, I go back. It's right and absolutely right. This money gets to the people who properly and should receive those funds 100%. But based on this at the moment, I'd even question this webinar series is all about our FinTechs coming to raise the challenge to save the country. Right now, we're about to be wiped out. Why would you, as a small business, come to any of the fintech lenders where we all require PGs, etc., because of the profile of the business? Suddenly say, no, I'll now pop over there, no PGs, no nothing, 50,000, nothing to pay, happy days.
It's a really interesting comment, and it's kind of like I find myself asking the question: does the government know this, and therefore have they decided to use taxpayers' money to finance this, and through the larger banks that are, you know, have the liquidity to be able to do that, to effectively get the banks to effectively buffer the company's capital requirements until such time that then everyone reneges on their debts, and then the taxpayer comes in and bails the bank out again? You know, where's the squeeze happening, or is it just a question of they just don't understand how to get money to businesses effectively? Which way is it? I see Max is kind of keen to.
Yeah, I think, and I was actually just going to pick up on John's point, but it's the same point you're making. I think it's a fundamental misunderstanding, actually, of what is possible digitally. I think that they look at it in terms of, oh, the big banks have a large market share of SMEs, therefore that must be the right mechanism. I mean, the whole thing of saying you don't need to do any credit check, you don't need to do any checks, it is looking entirely the wrong area. It is possible. I mean, on our platform, we do entirely digital full credit checks with a software on everyone who comes through. That's not the problem. That's just not the problem at all. And so actually it's still going to be the banks, the large banks processes that are not going to actually enable this to happen. Getting rid of the credit check it's the sort of cherry on the cake. It's not the cake itself as a problem. It's also, and so it just reflects absolutely the need to get the Sybils and Bibbles scheme out to the alternative finance market and to support that, because that is the only area that is going to be able to drive large volume lending really, really quickly. I mean, I'm very worried, and this is picking up a number of the other panelists' points, that on Monday it's going to be an absolute car crash as SMEs think yet again that they've been promised money, and there will be nothing like it will be a tiny proportion that get anything out at all over the next week. It's really concerning, and the problem is, as everyone knows, is, you know, this is appealing to the most vulnerable set of small businesses. This is going to be companies with under 200k turnover. They have no spare cash around. Every time we do one of these big schemes and it doesn't work, it's another week, it's another 2 weeks. We don't have, this is days probably companies have of cash flow remaining at this point. And so accelerating that accreditation of alternative lenders and making sure that digital players can actually get it out there will, one, avoid massively the completely correct point that John's made about fraud. I mean, it'll massively reduce that, but it'll also get it to where it needs to be. And I think it's quite scary that, although it's very, very good, I accept that discussions are still ongoing. It's just scary that they're still ongoing, and it's 4 days until launch. You know, that doesn't sound like to me like the big banks are going to be able to pull their finger out that quickly.
It's a really interesting thing. We've had a question in from, well, a statement, I would say, from Lee Burkett, saying, you know, within FinTech, we have these data tools to confirm revenues, to digital KYC, AML, you know, plug into HMRC for tax code verification. Pretty much everyone on this panel, including Stan and everyone else, has these abilities already. But why are we all missing out of the conversation? When, you know, the conversation and the, you know, the announcement that came out on the 27th from UK Finance was just about the 7 big lenders, and you know, noticeably no fintechs at all. I can see Oliver's itching to say something. Go for it, Oliver.
Yeah, I think there are 2 things I would say. So one is, I think for all of us that are here, it sounds very good to sound that the big banks cannot do it. I mean, I personally am of the view that it's about broadest possible reach. So I think there are some very, very, very serious questions. Hopefully someone will ask after the crisis of UK Finance and the British Business Bank about their priorities. But I think us as sort of alternative fintech type lending community, we should not say we are better than the big banks. I think this is a national effort where really, if you look at it from, again, an OKR perspective, this is about saving small business sectors. And by the way, just to say, one of the things we've already said, remember, we are also a platform to intermediate. We will forgo all commissions. right? Because the way we look at this is something the equivalent of the, Captain Tom, now maybe Colonel Tom. This is about, we all need to rally together and get the country through this sort of crisis. And therefore, I think we should, in my mind, position the whole, fintech alternative lending scene as complementing, but not against the big banks. That said, I am really flabbergasted, and that the leadership of the country, who is so well intended, has really not leveraged this opportunity. And by the way, it's even worse because we speak to a lot of them. Is verbally they are completely with that. It's not that they're saying, we don't want alternative lenders, we don't want fintechs. Quite the opposite. But somehow at the execution level, things are stuck. So I think that's the first thing that I think, at least we would encourage, is to be completely open about it. And tied, certainly, we're working with others. We will actually allow intermediation on the Tide platform where normally people pay commission completely for free. So that's number one. Number two is coming back to the OKRs. It is unclear, as John was saying, what is actually the government's objective. If it's mass distribution, even at the risk of some marginal fraud, which we know in our business happens, may be more advantageous than seeing 1/3, which is some of the estimates, 1/3 of SMEs fail. And that's the other thing I personally feel there's been too little public debate, where in the public health crisis, we had a lot of debate about what's the right thing, what are the right priorities. I'm missing that, right? I'm missing that as an economist to say, how important is it to save, 1/3 of SMEs, at the risk of some marginal additional fraud costs, versus being ultra hard on the credit rules and being at risk that a lot of SMEs that need it, don't get it. These are things in my mind that are for governments to decide. I mean, they should not be for us as individual lenders or business players, but it's really around, is the objective broad reach? Is the object, large numbers? Is the objective narrow avoidance of credit losses, including fraud losses, or the broader cost to the economy? These questions need to be answered. And then once you have the answer, they need to be clearly communicated in targets. And then the whole, machine of government needs to be aligned against these objectives, right? And then the final thing I would add to it is, I think, like we're all good practices. Once this whole thing is over, I think it needs to be some serious retrospective of, why we got ourselves where we are. But I think that's for later. For now, it's about solving it, opening up very quickly, opening up to alternative and fintech finance in addition to, not instead of, the big lenders. And it's for government to announce some hard targets like they did in testing, in the public health crisis, and then the entire sector being held to account to actually deliver against. Anyway, that's at least our perspective on it. So to us, we should not go into, differentiating between us and, and the high street banks. I think that's the wrong discussion to have at this stage.
Yeah, I think, as you say, I very much want a community, a mass effort to bring everything together. But it's not necessarily, that it's us against the banks. It's more a question of, but no one's talking. The banks aren't talking to us. We aren't talking to them. The government are talking to the banks, and the banks aren't talking to fintech. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah. So I just to disagree. So I think, first of all, one has to be fair because they're not here. But let me take the things.
They have been invited numerous times.
There's no question that they are looking for broader things. That from the Chancellor to the Economic Secretary to Business Secretary, they've all said, and I think we should believe them, that they are open to the sector. It is an execution problem, in my mind. Not sure where it is, whether it's at the British Business Bank level or certain government departments, but it's at the execution. So I think that's I think a really, really important statement to make. Secondly, I can tell you, because we speak to them also, quite a bit, the high street banks who are not presented here are also very frustrated. They're held to archaic, systems. The British Business Bank is enforcing certain lending standards on them that may or may not be appropriate, in the current crisis. So, partly why they're behind is because of their lack of technology and so on. But let's say if one wants to be really, doing the right thing for the country, one has to say the big banks should play a role. In particular, I think we should call out NatWest RBS for having taken the leadership in all of this, but they're also being limited in their ability. And this is what I'm saying. I think I come back to the thing is, the good news is we have the right intention at the government level. It's now around execution, setting hard targets, and then everyone that's part of the finance industry, not just the high street banks, but also them. We should all rally around this and make it happen for the next 6 months. And then we can go back to, you know, the good competitive landscape that we all love, right? But for now, that's, I think, not in the interest of the country.
Yeah, as I said, I do agree. I don't know, Alex, if maybe you can shed any light on this, but, you know, where does the sort of the limitations, or I don't want to use the word block because that insinuates that somebody is purposely blocking this, but, you know, there is obviously there is an intent from the government. There is a rudimentary system for delivery, and there is an expectation to get something out. Is it just a time thing?
Well, it is a time thing. I think it's about technology, isn't it? You know, the current systems are very manual, and what we need is a digital system. We need something with APIs. We need something that can turn around things very quickly. And we're trying to impose something on a system that doesn't yet exist, hasn't brought up its digital capability. So I think that's really important. And I would just like to echo what Oliver says, is that, you know, we are in this together. We are a bank at Starling. We are a deposit taking institution. We do have money that we can lend. So we're sort of at the apex between some of the FinTechs and some of the big banks. And I just would like to pick up, you know, RBS, NatWest have, you know, performed the best. They've got lots of loans out. They are publicly owned. Just want to point that out. If a publicly owned bank couldn't do it, then I would be very surprised. They have perhaps different pressures on them. That's just an aside. But I think I think the block is in technology, and this is what, you know, the big lesson of all of this will be when the review that Oliver is talking about happens, is about the whole push towards digital banking. This will speed it all up. It really will. Unfortunately, there's a bit of a bottleneck there for some of the lenders.
Yeah, I can imagine that from your perspective, there is, and I'm not putting words in your mouth, a little bit of frustration. You're obviously at the quite digital end of the spectrum, working with the very archaic system sort of behind that.
Well, we're not really frustrated. It's just a long process. I think that there are just lots of ducks you've got to get in a row. You don't just give out money when people apply. There are processes that you have to put in place, and that just, we can't speed up time, sadly. Wish we could.
Yeah.
Mark, do you mind if I jump in?
I was going to just ask you to jump in.
I'm chomping at the bit to say my piece, and there's been so many good things said, pretty much all of which I agree with. I mean, I absolutely believe that there needs to be some kind of sort of follow-up post-COVID to really understand and get into the nuts and bolts of what went on. But look, you know, I'm in a bit more of a gloves-off mode, and it's, whilst I agree with all of the points, it is incredibly frustrating if you are a business that needs funding right now. It is incredibly frustrating if you are an alternative lender sitting on tech and infrastructure that can issue 100,000 loans per month. It's incredibly frustrating that you're not even allowed to play the game. And I think, you know, there's a couple of sort of minor points, but I think they're getting more and more significant. But the strategy by which, and I have to assume it's government, strategy by which they are announcing the schemes, and also the BBB, the way they announce accreditation. You know, Starling obviously was accredited earlier in April and has been, I'm sure, moving heaven and earth to try and get started with the issuance of the product. But I think, you know, the legal negotiations and making sure everything's tick and tied to the BBB satisfaction, I'm sure that is causing, you know, a chunk of the delays. And the likes of Funding Circle have effectively been out of the market for 2 weeks in terms of loan processing. And this is the biggest SME lender in the UK, who are getting their ducks in order, as Alex puts it, to start issuing civils. And halfway through that process, another scheme was announced, which I'm pretty sure Funding Circle wouldn't have known about. So you now actually have the interesting situation where some of the civils lenders, they've actually got loan offers out with businesses who've suddenly turned around and said, whoa, hold on a second. Fantastic, we've got an offer, but actually I prefer a Bibbles loan. Do you mind if we, do I wait, or do I pay you back the money, or do we convert? So I do feel, to Oliver's point, I do feel sorry also for the banks and some of the civils lenders, because I think they are also pulled from pillar to post. But going back to the fundamentals, what didn't happen at the outset, and anybody who's been on this webinar before will probably think I'm a broken record, but we have an ecosystem around SME lending. And when the initial discussions took place between government and all of the various bodies, and they included the banks, and I think they included one alternative lender, they didn't address all of the players in the market. And John and I will know we've been involved in intense lobbying for the last X number of weeks, almost pulling our hair out. John actually had very, very long started. But, we've been involved in intense lobbying, but we have actually heard from various sources that there is a lack of trust and knowledge in the alternative finance sector. So that is a quote. I won't tell you from who, but it is a very real thing. And there are clearly some big cracks in the ecosystem in terms of how it's perceived, which, whether they're addressed now or later, they do need to be addressed. And I personally don't believe we need to wait until this whole thing is over to get into the nuts and bolts of it. I think somebody up there in power needs to be, needs to take accountability and say, do you know what? Rather than keep putting lipstick on this thing to try to make it good, let's just understand that it is a suboptimal scheme or model or framework. And let's get the right people who are lobbying us intensely. Let's get everybody around a table and work out, right, what's done is done, right? Nobody is going to dwell on that fact. But now what can we do going forward? Because it would take literally days to sign up a whole swathe of alternative lenders who have all of the capabilities that have been articulated here today to allow the government to have satisfaction that it wouldn't just be throwing money down the toilet effectively to fraudsters. It would only take days to engage this other area of the market and start issuing tens of thousands of loans in line with the intent from the government and the other bodies. It would only take days. So why don't we start? And that for me is the killer here. And we're not being listened to. And do you carry on being super nice for the next X number of weeks and not be listened to, or do we try and take a different tack? I don't know. I don't know what will push things over the edge to actually allow us to get some positive decisions for the SME lending sector as a whole made.
Thank you very much for that, Simon. I think it's a very valid point to make. As we've sort of said, we started this conversation and this whole webinar series off on, can FinTech save the UK economy? And the answer actually is no, not on their own. FinTech on its own can't achieve everything and anything. It needs the capital markets to play, it needs the regulators to play, it needs the government to play. As Oliver has said, and everyone on this panel kind of says, this is about a community effort. In the same way as a whole community has come together from a health perspective to help and support, industry should be coming together as a whole industry to help and support. And it does feel a little bit like, there are some key people and discussions that are not happening. John,
if I just pop in on that, because as Simon alluded to, I spent the last 4 weeks doing nothing else other than trying to promote and explain to various organizations what is actually required. So back to this community piece. So already the trade associations, so that's the one I represent. Then there's the one Innovate Finance with Charlotte, with Stephen with King from UK Finance, IMLA, and the Finance Nation Association. 4 of us last Friday presented to over 100 MPs and lords alongside the FCA saying this is what needs to happen and how it needs to happen. Clearly deaf, because nobody listened. Then you have the fact that we've put in a substantial piece in terms of what we asked for and how they needed to be. All they come back with is a list of another 40, 50 questions around that. This morning I spent 3 hours writing a piece for the CBI through Flora, who's also lobbying to get government to understand. So it's not as if they don't know or not aware. There's umpteen groups of us all pulling together. Back to time, mostly was on the plan last week with us, which is Clearbank, Nick Ogden there, again with another approach. They have all this information. It's been presented to them in an easy to digest, easy way for all of us, not just one, not two, all of us speaking for the whole sector and for the good of the sector and for the good of businesses. They're simply choosing, as we see it, not to listen. And there's nobody more deaf than someone who chooses not to listen.
It's a really interesting thing, I think, and I'm not trying to draw any parallels to the horrendous health impacts of the pandemic, but you know, the failing of businesses is not being reported quite as strongly as anything else. And unfortunately, I think that this is something that, you know, as I say, not doing away with health, which is a completely different subject. But, you know, today is the 30th of April. It's the end of the month for a lot of businesses. Our business is going to be there tomorrow. That's what a lot of people are going to be thinking. And we're hearing a bit about that, but we're not really seeing the massive impact because we won't see this loss of our micro businesses for actually quite a few months after we start coming out of all of these type of things, which is going to be, you know, too late. And that's kind of a lot of the sort of like the conversation on that. And, you know, when you look at some of the announcements that have come out of the, you know, the CBI and, you know, the FSB, they're sort of commending the bounce back loans and saying how wonderful it is. And yes, we've all said, you know, the intent is admirable, but you can't just have intent. You have to have execution. You have to have delivery, you know, and, you know, I would be as proud as anybody else on this call is as of Monday, we suddenly realized that actually, you know, NatWest or Barclays have been working tirelessly over the weekend and, you know, that they're lending all this money immediately as of Monday. That would be fantastic. But I just can't see that happening at this moment in time.
Mark,
Max, yeah.
Mark, your point actually about obviously, you know, the health point is incredibly important. But as Oliver said, there has not been the equivalent level of discussion about the impact of this on the SME population. Because if we get a huge number of SMEs going out of business and the enormous unemployment that will now drive, because so much of the UK economy is based on it, it's going to be very, very profound. But also, again, whereas in health, there has been the discussions about the impact of flattening the curve, what happens when we come out of lockdown and all these sort of things, that same discussion hasn't been had about the SME population. And yet, when you look at Germany, who's of course ahead of us in terms of this, this curve, they're already beginning to get very, very worried about, as we come out, that whole jaws opening between revenue and cost, and that's actually going to drive a real increase in SME failure. And then after that, a third wave, as companies find that the loans they took out now in a panic, that they can't actually service them. And there isn't that, at the same time as, you know, the whole idea, well, we just need to throw debt at a whole lot of SMEs and that will somehow magically solve the problem. I don't think that discussion about the longer term impact and actually how can we help SMEs work through what is the right thing for them to do in a safe and quick environment. That same discussion just hasn't been had, I think, even allowing for all of the lobbying that all of us have been doing.
I think so, and I think, you know, it goes to several points earlier, and one from Alex, which I might ask you to come back in on, is, you know, sort of lending isn't the only solution, you know, and there needs to be a method of communicating to businesses what they should be doing at this time. It's not a question of, you know, the Chancellor putting out, look, here's some free money, you take this and you'll be fine. You know, taking on debt is, as a business owner myself, is not something you take into lightly. This is not something that you should see as a quick and easy solution. There's long-term ramifications of that. So, you know, I was going to say, Oliver, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, so, you know, by the way, we wholeheartedly agree. We actually surveyed small businesses. So this is actually what you said is also echoing. There are a lot of people that don't know, right? So they're actually, you know, unclear. And I think, you know, what needs to come back to, you know, very early on, we were asked at Tide by a journalist, what would you recommend? And we actually said is appoint a small business czar, right? Because in part it is actually taking this bird's eye view of what actually is needed for small businesses. Now, our reading of the data is as follows, right? The single most important thing for small business, because remember, they're entrepreneurs, so this is the good news, right? They're very entrepreneurial, otherwise they wouldn't be in business, is actually to give them hope. And so the most important thing in a bizarre sort of way will be to show the way out of lockdown. And actually, I think the good example of where to do that is Austria. That isn't in the UK often spoken about, but that's actually what the chancellor there got very right, in the sense of they gave hope very early on, even though they were not immediately loosening the lockdown, because that meant small businesses could prepare, they saw perspective. And small businesses have multiple ways of surviving, right? One is the owner can put in money, they can go into hibernation, but all of these things have to do with the fact that there's light at the end of the tunnel. So that's the first thing that's missing. The second thing that's missing is exactly the clarity around the portfolio of support that there is. The one thing that, by the way, wasn't talked about here, but I would put into the fray, is the self-employed income support scheme, which, by the way, from our research, again, only applies to 44%, but it's also not up and running, right? And that's another really, really important component. So it's being very clear. Our suggestion to everyone involved in these matters is not to design ever more schemes, but to actually, I think John said this in the beginning, actually to make some of these schemes work. And that's if you want the second level, which is just to make sure that the portfolio of initiatives are there, that they really actually work. And I think the third thing that we need to do, and this is where your parallel to the public health crisis is very important, is to actually start getting data. The public health crisis was managed because early on there was critique about not enough testing, but at least you knew how many people were going to the hospital, how many people in intensive care, and then of course the unfortunate thing is death at the end. I mean, we don't get any of this data. I mean, there's sort of some highly questionable data being published by UK Finance about number of applications, which is probably just the people that actually made some very formal state. So all of this data is not really there. And so one has to have a little bit of empathy as well for those in power, that they get lobbied by loads of people, but they just do not understand in a very numeric sense of where the problem lies. So in my mind, all these three things need to be solved, right? Hope at the end of the tunnel, which is the most important things for entrepreneurs. Number two, real transparency and clarity around execution. How do I get hold of the scheme? What is the right scheme of myself, for me? And then thirdly, really numeric measurement, public holding of account of officials of, are we hitting the targets that we as a country have set ourselves for our economy? And I think once you do these three things, things become a lot more objective, they become less subjective. And then I think what we've seen on the public health side is once the numbers show that you are off, everyone starts rallying around trying to hit those numbers. And that's what's really, in my mind, missing. So we are hopeful that some of these things will move. But I think, to your question, Mark, I think that things will work well on Monday is probably, a very low probability scenario.
I think that's very true. We've been going on for a while now. I'm going to start bringing this to a close. We've still got a few questions coming in talking about credit unions and CDFIs, etc., which I think is kind of all lumped into that alternative finance conversation that we've just been having. But really, I was going to go to Simon first of all, because I know he has to jump off for another call, to just give us his final thoughts, and then I'll go round one at a time so we can just summarise the thoughts and hopefully a little bit of our maybe either expectations and vision for the future, maybe.
Sure, thanks, Mark. Sorry, I've got to disappear off. So, look, I'm ever the optimist. Things are changing, almost by the day. BBLs, positive announcements, lots of expectation around that. I personally believe that in the coming days, hopefully not weeks, but maybe that the voices and the information and the lobbying and the collaborative approach that I think the fintech industry and the alternative finance industry is having or giving, if you like, to the various bodies that are controlling what's happening. I am confident that something will change for the positive. I think it's what everybody is waiting for. And so in that light, I'm optimistic, but time is of the essence, absolutely. And we need to start engaging those that can help most. And Funding Options is working tirelessly with all of the people on the panel and other peers in the industry to try and make that happen. So, we will not lie down, and we'll continue to push. And we're doing every single thing that we can to try and find success for SMEs. So thanks for the invite again, and I'll hopefully talk to you again soon.
Thanks
Sorry,
very much, Simon. Thank you. Okay, perhaps go to Max next for your final thoughts.
Yes, I mean, I think the final thoughts, I think is, as everyone's raised, I think it's really important that we do all accept that we're all in this together. This is not banks against fintechs, etc., etc. It is only by a completely collective approach that we are going to help the SME economy. And, we're an SME, and I've worked in SMEs for most of my life, and it's an essential thing for the country that we get it right. We strongly believe that it is through using data and digital that is the best way of ensuring not only a speedy but essentially a safe outcome for SMEs. There will be people out there who are looking to profiteer from this, and we need to protect SMEs from that as much as anyone else. And so we are working tirelessly to deliver on that for SMEs, and are looking forward to better days ahead.
Perhaps Alex, we go to you for your final thoughts.
Well, I think I just echo what the speakers have just said. We are working around the clock to try and get our CBILS and our bounce back loans out the door. We'll do, we really are trying our hardest. And I know that some people are frustrated that we haven't started the CBILS loans yet, but we will be there very, very soon. But I think it does go back to the data and the stories of the business failures that we haven't really seen yet. Perhaps because it's too early days, but until we put a human face on this, and the Chancellor is faced with, business person after business person losing their livelihood in a very visual, powerful narrative, it's going to be quite hard to move the needle on this. But I don't think we should stop trying. And I really hope, I was really quite alarmed to hear what Simon said about having the indication that the non-bank fintech sector is not trusted or understood in government. I find that really alarming. We're a bank, so hopefully we're not included in that, but that's wrong. And I really hope somehow that something can be done to cross that bridge, because that is, we need to get through the importance of technology and digital in this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Alex. John, maybe coming to you to your final thoughts.
Sure. So, Alex, I actually wrote back to government only last week and again this morning, actually setting up the differences between non-bank lenders and banks. In a proper, this is how it actually works, to put those points right. Because you and ourselves differ in that you have a deposit license. Otherwise, we both have exactly the same customer focus, serviceability, and all those things. We're aligned in all of those things. And so I had to put that right. What I will say is that if the fintech lenders do not receive some form of party here, or joining the party, there won't be a fintech lending sector. And if that's the case, who's going to fund all the new start businesses post-COVID? Because that's where we fit. There was another 9,500 companies formed at Companies House last week, as there was the week before. Who is going to fund them? Because that's what we've been doing for the last 10 years. So therefore, it's important we are part of not only a solution right now, but part of a solution going forward as well. And again, we're entirely happy to support the whole banking piece. We are great fans of Starling. We're great fans of all the new banks, Tide as well, doing great jobs in bringing new products, new services to the SMEs, because SMEs are different today than what they were 8, 9, 10 years ago, or 40 years ago when I first started. They'd got different requirements, different things, and we need a proper, healthy, competitive sector to serve SMEs, and that's what we're doing. We need to keep competition between ourselves, a healthy competition, but for that, all of us need to be in the same game.
Absolutely. And last but not least, Oliver, perhaps some final thoughts from yourself.
Yeah, I think, what amazed me about this panel and some similar ones I've been on is how aligned we all are. And in the end, that's what I would take away. So deep down, I'm a Democrat with a small d. So I think governments are there to take responsibility, and I have faith in at a level into that. I hope with all our constructive pushing, and I think it does continue to need constructive pushing, maybe we will get there. My big hope is to what Alex said, is that this happens before we see people going out of business en masse. I don't think we're there just yet, but it's a bit like we're seeing the early indications, and we may regret as a country in a month or two not having acted now. So that's my biggest fear. However, I think that the strategy is one of, intra-industry collaboration. There's a time for hard competition when the gloves come off again, but I think now it's really about doing the best thing for the country. Number one, and number two is, I think, for all of us collectively continue, individually and collectively continue with our, our severe pushing on lobbying that things improve. And then last but not least, I think there will come a time, but that's really post-civil, post C-19, where some very serious questions need to be asked. But they were the same thing in the last financial crisis. I'm sure lessons will be drawn from that, and they need to be drawn. But I think I would really encourage not to go down that route just yet. It's really about collaborating, working very strongly with government and the government agencies like the British Business Bank to try to help them master this, this crisis, and giving our insights to them. And I'm hopeful, although I've said this now for the last couple of weeks, that sooner or later, there will be, that insight will come.
Thank you very much, Oliver. I think it's really good. Just to add my 2 pennies worth in, that really is where I see mine and the FinTech Times role in this thing, is just trying to keep the conversation going and keep people aligned, and bringing new people into the conversation each time, trying to widen the community effect so that we can actually continue to contact the government, continue to reach out to them, continue to try and offer and be involved in all the conversations. So I just wanted to say thank you very much to all our panelists for giving up your precious time. I know how busy you all are at this moment in time, so thank you very much for being there. Also, thank you very much to our audience for tuning in again and listening. We very much appreciate your interaction and your questions, so thank you very much. Sorry we didn't get to quite do every single one of them. So for that, I will say thank you very much, and let's finish the webinar here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.